There was a conference badge lying on the kitchen counter. That alone wouldn't have meant anything. My wife Jen was always going to conferences, networking events, panels, speaking gigs. Her career had been on a rocket trajectory lately. She used to be a mid-level marketing manager. Now she was overseeing national campaigns, getting attention from Forbes and LinkedIn gurus, rubbing shoulders with execs whose shoes probably cost more than my entire outfit. But the badge, it was from a digital marketing summit in Chicago. A summit she told me was canceled. I remember the night she said it. She was on the couch, blanket over her legs, wine in one hand, scrolling on her iPad. Chicago got scrapped, she'd said. Too many COVID cases. She sounded irritated. Disappointed, even. She went on about how this would have been a good opportunity for her panel on scalable authenticity. I nodded, made some joke about corporate buzzwords, and that was it. We moved on. But now here was this laminated badge, fresh print, her name in bold, Jennifer McKay, Senior Director, Brand Strategy. Not even her job title matched what she told me she had. She hadn't mentioned a promotion. And the date? It had been last week. She told me she was at a remote cabin in Oregon with her 2 girlfriends. The ones she always insisted I didn't know well enough to have an opinion on. I didn't touch the badge. Didn't even flip it over. I just stood there, staring at it like it had teeth. There was this strange static in my chest, not quite pain, not yet anger. Just something low, electric, and final. Like a silent agreement being torn up in the next room. The sun was coming through the blinds and slits, slicing the badge in half. I could almost see her reflection in it, laughing. I remembered the photos she posted, misty pine trees, mugs of cocoa, a blurry selfie in a fleece jacket. No service up here, she texted when I asked how it was going. Bliss. Now I was standing here, realizing those pictures could have been taken anywhere. Anytime. All it took was some filters and a well-angled cup of coffee. My eyes shifted to the kitchen trash. A receipt was sticking out, curled at the edge like a tongue. I pulled it out. Taxis. Room service. 2 glasses of wine. 1 steak. 1 risotto. Double occupancy, Hyatt Regency. My name wasn't on it. Neither was hers. But I knew the handwriting on the note scribbled in the margin. Her looping. Lazy cursive. Great view. I held the receipt like it might explain itself if I stared long enough. The edges were warm from the dishwasher steam that had just ended. She must have tossed it in this morning, not realizing it hadn't gone down all the way. Or maybe she did. Maybe she wanted me to see it. Maybe part of her wanted an excuse to end it. But she wouldn't. Not directly. Jen liked control. She liked the illusion of being the one who decides. The one who evolves, outgrows, moves on. I was just supposed to stay in place. Supportive. Steady. Silent. Her rock, she used to say. I used to be proud of that. But rocks don't move. They don't speak. And eventually, they get stepped over. She came in 10 minutes later, hair still damp from the gym, earbuds in, humming something she didn't care if I heard. She didn't notice the badge. Or she pretended not to. She walked past me, kissed my cheek without meeting my eyes, and went straight to the bedroom. I stood there, still holding the receipt like a damn invitation. But I didn't confront her. I didn't ask. I just slid it into my pocket, badge and all. My hands weren't shaking. My voice, when I said, "How was your workout?" was perfectly normal. She said it was fine. Asked if I could pick up dinner tonight. She had a late Zoom with someone in New York. Of course she did. That night, I watched her from across the dinner table while she half listened to my story about work and scrolled on her phone. She laughed at something on the screen, then looked up, eyes glazed. "Sorry, what were you saying?" I said, "Never mind." She nodded, like she was relieved I let it go. And in that second, something settled in me, not grief, not betrayal. Something colder. Something useful. She'd already left in her mind. She was just waiting for the moment to make it official. But she didn't want to be the villain. No, Jen would never walk out unless she could tell herself she had a reason. Unless she could frame it like growth. Liberation. Some narrative that made her feel powerful. Fine. I'd give it to her. I'd lay out every brick, every step, every door she needed to walk through, until she convinced herself it was all her idea. And when she finally left, she'd find out the only thing she'd packed was a lie. She still made the bed every morning. Tucked in the corners, fluffed the pillows just the way I liked. It was such a small detail, but for a while it convinced me things were okay. It was something she did when we were happy, something that made our home feel solid. But eventually I realized it was just habit. Muscle memory. Like kissing someone goodbye without meaning it. The bed was made, yes, but we hadn't touched each other in weeks. Not a fight, not an argument. Just an invisible wall, a slow rewiring of where her attention went. She used to sit beside me on the couch and put her feet on my lap, scrolling through shows while I rubbed her ankles. Now she sat in the armchair across the room, laptop open, half smiling at emails I'd never see. I'd catch her pausing to stare at the screen, not frowning, not smiling, just somewhere else. When I asked what was on her mind, she'd blink like I'd interrupted something. Nothing, she'd say. Just work. Then she'd close the lid and ask what I wanted for dinner like nothing was off. She started waking up earlier. Not 5 minutes early, but full hours. I'd find the shower already running when I got up, the smell of her hair products lingering like proof that she existed in another timeline. By the time I got to the kitchen, she was dressed, caffeinated, already halfway out the door. Early client call, she'd toss over her shoulder. Need to prep. The first few times I believed it. But then I checked the calendar. There was no early call scheduled. I told myself maybe she added one last minute. Maybe it was just a personal project. Maybe. But then I noticed her outfits were different. More careful. Before, she dressed smart and simple, efficient, clean lines. Now there was intention, style, details, jewelry I hadn't seen before, and perfume. She never used to wear perfume in the morning. That was for date nights. For me, she got a new phone. Said hers was glitching. But the new one had a fingerprint lock instead of the usual swipe code we both knew. She didn't offer to share the new password. And her laptop, once always left on the kitchen island, started following her into the bedroom, into the bathroom, into silence. Just easier to work from there, she said when I asked. Fewer distractions. I was the distraction now. I knew it but said nothing. I still wanted to believe. One night, I was taking out the trash and noticed a bag from an expensive boutique I didn't recognize. Inside was a receipt. Designer heels. Black. Size 7. Her size. The shoes weren't in our closet. I checked. The next day, she walked in wearing something new, sleek, dark, deliberate. I asked if it was from the same store. She blinked. What store? I let it go. She started using words like boundaries and energy when we talked. She said she was working on herself, that she needed to feel more aligned. At first, I supported it. I mean, who wouldn't want their partner to grow? But then I noticed how her version of growth didn't include me. When I asked to join her for a yoga class, she laughed too quickly. You wouldn't like it, she said. It's more of a spiritual thing. When I offered to take a weekend off to visit her next seminar, she said it was for women only. When I said we should plan a vacation, just us, she said she was already booked for a solo retreat. You understand, right? She asked. I just need space to reset. I nodded. Of course I understood. I was being trained to understand. Her social media changed next. I didn't notice right away. One day I went to tag her in a photo from a friend's wedding and realized I couldn't see her profile. I thought she deleted it. But when I checked from a different account, it was still there, just hidden from me. Private. Curated. And full of photos I'd never seen. Photos that didn't include me. Quotes about freedom, self-love, choosing joy. Her followers were growing. Her captions were longer, more poetic, more personal. She was building something out there, some brand, some identity I was never consulted on. I wasn't part of the narrative. I was just the background from which she was emerging. She still smiled at me, still said, love you, before bed. But the smile stopped reaching her eyes. And when I said, love you too, I felt like I was handing back a borrowed phrase. Like we were two actors, still reading our lines long after the audience had left. I told myself I was being paranoid, that every marriage went through seasons. But then I found the car detail slip in the glove compartment. Full interior cleaning, leather treated, scent neutralizer. Dated the day before she was supposed to be at her friend's place. She hadn't driven anywhere, she said. Just stayed in, watched Netflix, needed a quiet night. But the mileage didn't match. The back seat had an indent. Like someone had sat there. Like someone had leaned back into. I stopped myself. I closed the glove box. I stared through the windshield at the driveway and told myself I had to be better. More trusting. More secure. But deep down, I knew what I saw. Not proof. Just pieces. Fragments of a puzzle she hoped I wouldn't assemble. Not yet. Not until she was ready to leave. On her terms. Her story. But I wasn't waiting for her story anymore. I was already writing mine. It was a Tuesday night, the kind of unremarkable evening that shouldn't have mattered. She said she had a client dinner, some last-minute meeting with an agency partner from out of town. She put on the dress I bought her for our anniversary, tight black, subtle slit down the side, the one she said made her feel dangerous. I remember how she looked when she walked down the stairs, earrings swinging, hair freshly blown out. She gave me that half smile, the one meant to disarm, and said she wouldn't be too late. I kissed her cheek and told her to have a good night, and she left, heels tapping like gunshots down the hallway. I almost believed her. I almost wanted to believe her. But I learned to pay attention to the things she didn't say, to the little changes she assumed I was too dumb, too complacent, or too in love to notice. And tonight, something was off. The restaurant she named didn't exist. Not anymore. I'd looked it up earlier when she was in the shower, closed 6 months ago due to fire damage. She'd said the name casually, confidently, like she'd been there before. That was what made it worse. This lie wasn't nervous or improvised. It was practiced. I waited 15 minutes after she left. Then I opened her old iPad. She hadn't used it in weeks, not since getting the new phone, but I knew she never wiped it. She wasn't the paranoid type, not with me, anyway. She trusted I wouldn't go looking. But I had. And I found what I didn't want to find. Messages. Not recent. A few weeks old, buried in a side app, one of those messengers that doesn't ping if you disable the alerts. No names, just initials. R, but the tone was unmistakable. Last night was incredible. Still feel your lips on me. Can't wait till it's just us. Photos. Blurry. Dark. Her legs on a hotel bed. A shirt that wasn't mine. A watch I'd never seen. Her smile tilted up towards someone else. But it wasn't the messages that broke me. Not even the pictures. It was the video. 13 seconds. Taken in a mirror, shaky, hurried. She was laughing quiet, breathy, whispering shoo, then biting her lip. And she said his name. Not just an initial. A name. A full name. One I recognized. Ronan Delaney. Her boss. She'd mentioned him before, once or twice. Always with that dismissive tone. He's harmless. He's kind of awkward, actually. He's married, too. Like that made it safe. Like that was supposed to reassure me. But now here she was, in what looked like a hotel bathroom, his arm sliding around her waist, his voice muffled as he pulled her back into the frame and kissed her neck. 13 seconds. That was all it took to unravel years. I didn't feel rage. Not yet. What I felt was something colder. Final. Like a door closing somewhere deep in me. I watched the video twice. Then I deleted it. Not to forget, but to make sure no trace of it existed on her side. I wanted her to think she was still winning. Still safe. Still unseen. She came home around 11. Smelled like wine and expensive soap. Her makeup was smudged just slightly, lips worn down at the edges. She kicked off her heels in the foyer, tossed her bag on the chair, and walked into the kitchen where I was pouring a glass of water. "Sorry I'm late," she said, not sounding sorry. They wouldn't stop talking. I nodded, handed her the water. She sipped, leaned on the counter, not meeting my eyes. "You okay?" she asked, like I was the one who seemed off. I smiled. "Just tired." She kissed my cheek again, lingered just a second longer this time, maybe out of guilt, or maybe habit. Then she went upstairs. I stood in that kitchen for 10 minutes after she left, listening to the creak of the stairs, the muffled click of drawers opening, the light shut of the bathroom door. I didn't move. I just stared at the marble counter, the water glass she touched, the ring she left beside the sink. She only took it off when she wanted to look single. She used to say rings got in the way when she typed. But I knew better now. Every habit, every excuse, it was all scripted. All meant to keep me complacent. But I wasn't anymore. I was done being the man she thought she could manipulate with a kiss and a story. I was done giving her the benefit of the doubt while she stripped our life down behind my back. I didn't need to confront her. That wasn't the plan. That would give her power. Give her a narrative. I wanted her to think she'd gotten away with it. I wanted her to think she was in control. Because when she finally decided to leave me, when she packed her bags and left, thinking it was her decision, she never knew that I had spent months clearing the way. That I had turned every crack into a chasm from which she could not return. That I had rewritten every financial relationship, every joint activity, every legal thread to my advantage while she was too busy with her boss. She wanted to be free. She would be. From everything. Especially me. I started with her calendar. Not the shared one. We hadn't used that in months. She managed her life on her own schedule now. Independent, like a CEO of some lifestyle startup that had outgrown its silent co-founder. But I still had access to her tablet, the one she thought was forgotten in the back of the hall closet. It synced to her iCloud automatically, and all I had to do was open the calendar app to see everything she didn't say. Most entries were vague: client lunch, consult call, solo work block, but the time blocks were consistent. Always between 1 and 4 in the afternoon, always booked weeks ahead, always marked with fake company names that didn't exist when I searched them. That's when I began my real work. I didn't follow her. That would have been loud, obvious, sloppy. Instead, I started tracking patterns. What time she left, how she dressed, which car she took. She had a second set of flats she kept in her trunk, probably to walk from whatever parking structure she thought gave her cover. I started noting the dry cleaning receipts. She claimed they were for work blazers, but twice I saw silk pieces she never wore around me. She once said she hated silk, said it clung in the wrong places. Apparently, it didn't anymore. I started doing small things, changing the position of her mirror slightly, shifting a single perfume bottle on her dresser by an inch. Every time, when I checked later, it had been adjusted back. She was grooming herself with surgical precision, then pretending she came home from a team lunch or work strategy session. I smiled every time she lied. It meant she still thought I was in the dark. It meant I had more time. Then I tested her best friend, Allison, the one who always covered for her. I made a new number, used a texting app, crafted a message pretending to be a man who met Jen at a conference. Something vague, something loaded with implication, but no hard facts. Hey Jen, it was amazing meeting you last week. Haven't stopped thinking about your smile. I sent it on a Tuesday morning, timed for when she'd be in her office. A minute later, Allison texted her, on her real number, synced to the tablet. Hey, did you give your number to someone at that summit? Just got a weird message from an unknown guy. Jen's reply came 10 minutes later. Don't worry. Just ignore it. Probably spam. Thanks for checking though XX. No denial. No confusion. Just smooth, practice damage control. I added another name to the list. Allison wasn't just a friend. She was a co-conspirator. She probably didn't know about Ronan, though. That was the part Jen kept sacred. Next I dug into the finances. We had a shared account, but she started shifting more of her purchases to her business card, a move she claimed was easier for taxes. But the transfers didn't add up. The deposits into her business account were higher than her invoice reports. I logged in one night while she slept. She always used the same password, just changed the numbers. I found weekly withdrawals, odd numbers, always at ATMs near hotels or wine bars in neighborhoods we never visited. I traced one of them, a boutique hotel near the harbor. I booked a room there on a Thursday night. Told her I was traveling for work. I stayed in the bar until midnight, watching. She never showed. But Ronan did. Alone. He sat at the edge, ordered 2 drinks, then texted someone. His phone screen lit up and the name, Jay, appeared at the top. 10 minutes later, she walked in, hood up, dressed like someone trying not to be seen. She kissed him. Not passionately. Casually. Like they'd done it 100 times. Like it was just another Thursday. I didn't take pictures. I didn't need proof. Proof is for people seeking justice. I wasn't. I was planning something colder. Bigger. Something final. When she came home the next day, she brought croissants. Smiled like she missed me. Said the retreat had been centering. I asked if she'd want to go away next month. Just us. Her eyes flickered. Let me check my schedule, she said. I already knew it was booked, with Ronan, a 2-day strategy offsite in Sonoma. I nodded. Said to let me know. That night, I printed a copy of our prenup and started rereading the clauses. Infidelity nullified support. Any joint assets acquired after the affair could be claimed solely by the loyal spouse if proof existed. I didn't need confrontation. I needed timing. I needed her to believe she was safe, trusted, free. I needed her to be so convinced of her power that when I pulled the floor out from beneath her, she'd realize she wasn't falling. She'd already fallen, and I'd been watching from above. Every smile she gave me now was a gift. Every lie, a note in the symphony she didn't know I was composing. She thought she was sneaking through shadows. But I was the dark. It was the company's spring gala, held at a rooftop venue downtown, overlooking the city lights she once claimed made her feel alive. I'd never attended before. It was her world, her colleagues, her show. But this year, she insisted I come. Said it would be nice to be seen together. I accepted without hesitation. She didn't know I'd already spoken to the event coordinator, arranged for a very specific file to play at a very specific moment during the sponsor appreciation slideshow. Nothing overt, No explicit images, no nudity. Just a short clip, tastefully muted, barely 10 seconds long. Her reflection in a hotel mirror, brushing her hair, Ronan's arm wrapping around her waist, his voice mouthing something inaudible that made her laugh in a way she hadn't laughed with me in years. It would look like an accident, a technical glitch, a file mix-up. 10 seconds, barely long enough for anyone else to process, but long enough for her to see, long enough for him to see, long enough for her world to crack down the center in the middle of her kingdom. She was radiant that night, smiling too wide, laughing too loudly. Her hand on my arm felt rehearsed, fingers cold and posed. I played along, toasted with her team, asked polite questions about meaningless projects. She leaned into me like a woman in love, but I could feel the tension in her spine every time Ronan walked by. Then the lights dimmed for the slideshow, and her posture changed. It happened during slide 36, between a photo of the regional team and a quote about synergy. The clip played, silent and seamless, just long enough for recognition to hit her in the throat. I felt her body go rigid beside me. Her wine glass stilled midair. Ronan's eyes flicked to the screen and then to her, and in that moment I knew he hadn't seen the clip beforehand. His face paled, jaw clenched. She turned to me slowly, mouth slightly open, trying to catch her breath. Her lips moved, but nothing came out. Applause followed, oblivious, as the slideshow ended. I leaned in close and said, "You dropped something." She blinked. I handed her a printed screenshot of the message thread between her and Ronan, the same thread she thought she deleted months ago. She stared at it, jaw trembling. "It's not what it looks like," she whispered. I raised an eyebrow. Said nothing. She stepped back, stammering. It was work. That clip, someone must have hacked." She stopped when she realized no one else was reacting. No one else had noticed. The devastation was surgical. Just for her. "Okay," she breathed, trying a new tactic. "It was a mistake. A terrible mistake. But we were going through a rough patch, and you were so distant. You stopped looking at me." I tilted my head, calm as ice. She scanned my face for anger, for emotion, for anything human to latch onto. There was nothing. "You never paid attention to me," she tried again, louder this time, like rehearsing a defense in a courtroom that never came. I didn't flinch. I felt invisible, like I didn't matter. Then the bitterness surfaced. "And maybe I don't regret it," she hissed, stepping closer. "Maybe he made me feel something you haven't in years. Maybe this was always going to happen, because you were too busy being the stable guy in the background." I let her words hang there, venomous and empty. Then she saw it. In my eyes. The absence of hurt. The absence of shock. And that's when the fear finally crawled in. What did you do?" she asked, voice smaller now. I took one step forward. One breath. One sentence. "You gave up everything for a man who won't even take your calls next week." Her face cracked, just slightly, as the weight of it started to land. Her eyes darted toward Ronan, who was already walking out, his wife likely demanding answers before the elevator reached the ground floor. Jen looked back at me, voice caught in her throat. But I didn't move. I didn't speak again. I simply watched her unravel, strand by strand, in a room full of people who would never know what just happened, while she drowned in silence she couldn't control. The applause faded. The music resumed, and I stood there, still beside her, as her perfect little life began to rot from the inside out. She followed me out of the venue like a woman on fire, heels clacking against the pavement, clutching her coat around herself like it could shield her from what had just happened, like fabric could rewind time. "You planned that," she spat, her voice already shaking. "You did this to humiliate me." I didn't answer, just kept walking toward the car, keys in my hand, letting the silence stretch like a noose. She caught up and grabbed my arm, nails digging in. "Say something, goddammit." Her eyes were wild now, mascara smudged, voice trembling with the realization that I was no longer the man she used to manipulate. I turned to her slowly, watched her face twist as she searched mine for anger, for betrayal, for anything human. But I gave her nothing. That silence, my silence, was the one thing she had never prepared for. "This isn't who you are," she said next, switching tactics like flipping cards in a deck. "You're better than this. You don't hurt people." I tilted my head slightly. "I don't lie to people." She flinched. "I made a mistake." She tried again, voice softer, eyes glassy. "I was lost. You don't know what it's like to feel dead inside." Like you're just existing. I didn't blink. Her lips parted in shock, like she couldn't believe I'd said it out loud. Like the words had never sounded that sharp before. You smothered me, she snapped suddenly, venom flaring again. Every day it was routine, routine, routine. You're predictable, you're boring, you're... I raised a hand, and she stopped mid-sentence, startled. You chose boredom over loyalty. That's not my failure. She stumbled over her next breath, trying to rally, but it came out desperate. You never saw me. Not the real me. You married this version of me that didn't exist, and then got angry when I changed. I stepped closer, eyes locked on hers. I didn't get angry. I got out of your way. Her face contorted at that, somewhere between confusion and grief and something darker, more primal. You think you're so perfect, she hissed. You think this makes you strong? You're just a cold bastard who couldn't keep his wife interested. I smiled, just a little, and that smile broke her more than anything else. And yet you still want my attention. That was the moment she lost her grip entirely. She screamed, an actual scream, raw and cracked, right there in the parking lot. Then the tears came, sudden and theatrical. You don't even care, do you? None of this mattered to you. I mattered. I looked at her, really looked at her, this woman who had weaponized her own sadness, who had lived for control, for emotional dominance, and now stood stripped bare, powerless, furious that her usual tricks weren't working. You mattered, I said, slow and cold. Until you sold your integrity for a man who won't even answer your calls by Friday. Her knees wobbled like I'd punched her in the gut. She looked down, like maybe the pavement had a better answer than I did. But I wasn't done. You don't feel guilty. You feel caught. And now you want to rewrite the story to make me the villain because it hurts too much to look in the mirror. Her hands were shaking now, fists clenched at her sides. I gave you everything, she whispered. I sacrificed for this marriage, and you, I cut her off. No. You sacrificed the marriage. For ego. For validation. For a man who was never going to leave his wife. Her eyes darted up. That struck something. A nerve. A fear. And that was when I saw it, the moment she knew the power was gone. That I wouldn't chase her. Wouldn't beg. Wouldn't even mourn. She tried to summon rage one more time, grasping at the last trick in her arsenal. Fine. Leave. But don't pretend you'll find better. You won't. You'll be alone, because you're emotionally dead inside. I stepped around her and opened the car door, looked at her one last time as she stood trembling under the soft glow of a street lamp, and said, alone is better than being slowly killed by someone who smiles while stabbing. Then I got in the car, engine humming to life, her figure shrinking in the rearview mirror, her hands at her sides, mouth moving but unheard. She wasn't just losing me. She was losing the last person who ever saw her without pity. And the silence she used to rule with was now all she had left. She still thought she had time. That was the most beautiful part of it, watching her cling to the illusion that she could still control the narrative, that if she cried in the right tone or rewrote the past with enough conviction, she could steer this back into her hands. But she never realized I had stopped reacting long before the rooftop. The moment I saw that message from Ronan, I became someone else entirely, someone she'd never met. While she scrambled to recover from public exposure, I was 10 steps ahead, dismantling the scaffolding of the life she thought she owned. I started by separating every joint thread that tied us together. Bank accounts, emptied, split, and resecured under my name alone. I'd already moved my income into a new account 6 weeks ago, one she didn't know existed. The credit cards followed. Anything we shared was closed. Her card? Canceled. Not out of spite, but because the bills were in my name. The utilities, gas, electric, water, internet, all under my account, and all transferred or shut down within 2 hours. I left the house running just long enough for her to think everything was fine before the lights blinked off mid-shower. The car? That was mine. I leased it, insured it, paid every monthly bill. She kept it like it was hers, like it was a gift wrapped in love. I had it remotely disabled on a Thursday morning. Tow truck picked it up by noon. When she called the leasing company in a panic, they transferred her to me. I didn't answer. Just let it ring and ring and ring. Then came the hard pieces, the evidence. I'd compiled everything. The texts, the screenshots, the timestamps, the videos, even the financial records of her little hotel rendezvous. I didn't send them to a lawyer. I didn't need to, not yet. I sent them to her parents. Not with commentary. Just a single line. Thought you should know. Her father replied an hour later. Just one word. Understood. Then her friends, the close ones, the ones who always smiled at me like I was a placeholder in her spotlight. I sent them each a curated packet. Clean, cold, damning. No insults. No rants. Just the raw data. I knew what it would do. Women like her survive on reputation, on curated identity. Once the mask slipped, the silence of her circle would be louder than any confrontation. Ronan was next. I scheduled an anonymous tip to his HR department with exact dates, locations, and photos, enough to raise red flags without drawing a direct line back to me. He would be under investigation within days. Not because of the affair corporate doesn't care about morality, but because of ethics, favoritism, and misuse of company funds. I knew what hotels they met at. I had receipts. I had surveillance timestamps. And if they dug deep enough, they'd find the overlap between his travel claims and her reimbursements. His career was now a slow bleed. She texted me once that week. "We need to talk." I didn't respond. She called the next day. I let it ring. She emailed 2 days after that. Subject line: "Can we fix this?" Inside, paragraphs of shifting tones, apologies, nostalgia, manipulations, backhanded insults dressed as reflections. I didn't open it. I printed it, added it to the file. Because the final step was already in motion. The divorce papers were drafted by my lawyer 3 weeks ago, held until I gave the signal. I triggered it with one call. Filed for cause, with attached evidence of infidelity and financial misconduct. California law may not reward pain, but it respects planning. The prenup kicked in the moment adultery was proven. She would get nothing from me. Not the house. Not the accounts. Not the car. And because we had no children, there were no ties to cut slowly. Just a blade, sliding clean through. The house, technically mine before the marriage, was being prepped for sale. My agent already had buyers lined up. She still lived there, for now, pacing through rooms she once ruled, not realizing eviction papers were days away. I didn't tell her. I wanted her to feel it. When the locks changed, when the mail stopped arriving, when her name vanished from every system she used to control. I even changed the Wi-Fi password. Left a note on the modem: "Your access has expired." Every step I took was deliberate, silent, clinical. No screaming. No revenge fantasies. Just closure, precision engineered. Because this was never about punishing her. It was about showing her that the moment she thought she held all the power was the moment she lost everything. And I didn't need to raise my voice or break a single thing to do it. I just needed to let her destroy herself, and then take away the wreckage she thought she could still stand on. The conference was her last big stage. A spotlight event she'd been hyping for months, the one where she'd be presenting the future of authentic brand storytelling to a room full of peers, clients, sponsors, and executives. It was the culmination of everything she'd built, every carefully curated move she'd made to climb from a middle-tier manager to a name that got whispered with admiration in industry circles. She wore white, sharp blazer, tailored trousers, confidence stitched into every seam. I arrived 10 minutes before her speech began, already seated in the front row. She didn't expect me there, not anymore. She'd stopped inviting me to these things long ago, claiming they were exhausting or too professional for me to sit through. But I'd RSVP'd through a separate channel, using a connection she didn't know I had. When she walked onto the stage and saw me, I saw her pause, just a flicker, a glitch in the fluidity of her entrance. Her smile tightened. Her eyes lingered on me for a second too long. Then she started talking. Her voice was steady at first, rehearsed, confident. She launched into her usual pitch, storytelling as emotional capital, consumer intimacy, trust economies. But the audience wasn't with her. Not this time. I started. Phones buzzed. One by one, attendees glanced down at their screens with growing discomfort. Whispers started near the back of the room and began bleeding forward like a quiet tidal wave. She pushed through her slides, but her voice cracked mid-sentence. Slide 6. The moment hit. Someone in the back, a woman, I think, gasped, because the next slide wasn't hers. It was one of the files I distributed an hour earlier, timed and sent to key media influencers, a few well-placed bloggers, and every major client her firm represented. A screenshot, her message thread with Ronan. "Can't wait to feel your hands again. I still dream about Chicago." Then another, a short clip of her adjusting her blouse in the mirror of a hotel bathroom, Ronan walking past in the reflection. No sound. No explicit content. Just enough to tell the truth. The screen blinked, then returned to her deck. But the damage was already a living organism. She froze. A tremble rippled down her hand where it held the clicker. "That's not part of the presentation," she muttered, trying to recover, trying to find some grip in a room where the floor had disappeared. The host stepped forward to whisper something in her ear. She flinched, nodded, then looked out into the sea of 100 faces and saw what she'd never imagined. Judgment. Contempt. Pity. She tried to laugh. Looks like someone's having fun with my files, she said, but the room didn't laugh with her. Not even a chuckle. Someone stood up and walked out. Then another. Phones were up. Messages were flying. Screenshots shared. Within minutes, her professional life, the brand she had meticulously crafted, was unraveling in real time. Her voice wavered again. This is personal. It's irrelevant to the content, but her words came out hollow. Weak. And that was when she saw him. Ronan. Near the entrance, briefcase in hand, talking to 2 HR execs from the firm. One of them handed him a folder. He looked up at her once, then walked away. No wave. No goodbye. Just gone. She blinked, and the spotlight suddenly became a noose. Her hand rose to shield her face, as if that could block the fall. I need a minute, she whispered, and turned toward the wings of the stage. But the host didn't follow. No one did. They just let her go. I watched every second. Never blinked. I didn't move, didn't smile, didn't flinch. Just sat there, front row, the only figure she could see clearly through the blur of humiliation. She paused halfway off stage, eyes locking with mine, face contorting into something between a plea and a snarl. She mouthed something, maybe why or you, but no sound came. And that silence crushed her more than any public heckle ever could. She stumbled the last few steps behind the curtain. I stayed. Let the aftermath unfold. Let the conversations buzz louder now, the gossip fire catch. Her name, once followed by praise, now spoken like a warning. I knew her parents were watching the live stream. I'd sent them the link earlier. Her father would have turned it off by now. Her mother wouldn't have. I'd already spoken to her best friend. Allison was done covering for her. Said she'd known something was wrong. Said she wished I'd told her sooner. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Because now, everything was self-evident. She built a castle on performance, loyalty as a costume, trust as branding. And now it was ash. I stood when the lights came up. Walked slowly to the exit, unbothered by the storm around me. People parted. Eyes followed. Whispers rose. But none of them mattered. What mattered was her, behind that curtain, sobbing into a designer sleeve, realizing she'd burned down everything just to feel desired by a man who didn't even stay for her collapse. And she knew, I had watched her fall. Calm, cold, silent. Her final audience. Her perfect ending. It happened at her parents' house, of all places, a forced gathering meant to smooth things over, as if anything could be smoothed, after the explosion she set off. Her mother had invited both sides, desperate to salvage some fragment of her daughter's image before it all turned to dust. Her father barely spoke. My brother came, at my request, quiet and composed. Allison was there too, standing near the doorway like she didn't know whose side to be on anymore, arms crossed, jaw tight. Even Ronan showed up, invited by Jen, apparently, though he hovered near the back, clearly realizing too late what kind of ambush he was walking into. Jen greeted everyone with this pathetic attempt at composure, as if she could charm her way through the wreckage. She looked at me like we could still play house. But I wasn't there for reconciliation. I was there to burn what was left of the illusion. It started with her voice, all sugar-laced venom. So you're just going to act like you're the sane in all this? Like you didn't push me into his arms? The room tensed instantly. Her mother gasped, her father's hand gripped his glass a little tighter. I stepped forward, voice calm but cold enough to sting. I didn't push you anywhere. You jumped. And you landed face first in a man who left the minute your career caught fire. She laughed, a brittle, choking sound, then turned to her mother. Do you hear this? He thinks this is all my fault. I turned to her mother. Would you like to see the receipts? Or should I replay the video for the people in the back? Gasps. Audible now. Her dad stood up, but didn't say a word. Jen's smile collapsed as she saw the room shift, eyes on her like spotlights on a fraud. That video was private, she snapped, reaching for anything to seize control. It was an invasion. No, I said. Your affair was an invasion. Of trust. Of vows. Of every single thing you pretended to stand for. She spun toward Ronan, who looked like he wanted to melt into the wall. Are you really going to just stand there? Say something. He opened his mouth, then closed it. I think I should go, he muttered, and that was it. She stared at him like he'd just shot her. Are you serious? After everything. You're not worth the fallout, he said under his breath, then turned and left. Someone in the back whispered, wow. Allison looked away, disgusted. Jen turned back to me. eyes wild, voice rising. You think you're so perfect? You think you're better than me? You were a ghost in this marriage. A void. And you filled that void with betrayal. I snapped, louder now, stepping forward. You didn't cheat because I was distant. You cheated because you're addicted to validation. You needed to be adored so badly you torched everything just to feel seen. I was suffocating, she screamed, eyes red, spit flying. You never made me feel alive. Because alive for you means reckless, destructive, selfish, I shouted back. You don't want love, you want worship. And the second someone stops feeding your ego, you run. Her mother was crying now. Her father just shook his head and sat down, like all the strength had drained from his bones. I made one mistake, she tried again, her voice breaking. One mistake. I warned. It was a 6-month affair. Dozens of lies. Thousands of dollars stolen from our shared accounts. Do you even know how many people you've lied to? Used? Manipulated? You're just trying to humiliate me, she sobbed now, fully unraveling. You could have ended this quietly. You wanted to ruin me. I stepped closer, now face to face. No, you ruined yourself. I just turned on the lights so everyone could see it. She slapped me. Not hard, but loud enough to make the room freeze. My brother stepped forward, but I raised a hand. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I looked at her with nothing but pure, clinical clarity. You used to be beautiful, but now all I see is a black hole in heels. She collapsed to her knees, sobbing, mascara streaking down her face. Her mother went to her, but even that was hesitant now. Allison stepped back, disgusted. No one said a word. No one defended her. She looked around for help, for sympathy, for anything, but found only silence. That was the moment she realized it was over. Not just the marriage, not just the affair. Her entire persona, gone. I turned, walked to the door, and paused. Next time, I said loud enough for the room to hear. Betrayal might cost you more than a marriage. It might cost you everyone. Then I walked out, leaving her collapsed in the ruins she built herself. She lost the job within a week. No formal announcement, just a quiet line in an internal email. Effective immediately, Jennifer McKay will no longer be with the company. They didn't say why. They didn't have to. Her clients knew. Her colleagues knew. Her reputation, once built on polished presentations and hollow words like integrity and vision, had crumbled in real time before their eyes. The woman who once commanded rooms with a rehearsed smile and a stack of buzzwords was now radioactive. Her LinkedIn turned off. Her Instagram deleted. Her name was scrubbed from the company website like she never existed. The articles she was so proud of, the panels she moderated, the awards she flaunted, they all vanished beneath a wave of silence and polite disassociation. Her friends, the ones who cheered her on, who liked every curated photo of her standing in hotel lobbies and sipping wine at rooftop bars, they disappeared too. No more queen comments. No more heart emojis. They ghosted her, blocked her, unfollowed without a word. Even Allison cut ties, cold and final. You made your bed, she told her, and then lit it on fire. Her family didn't fare much better. Her father stopped answering her calls. Her mother answered once, then hung up the moment Jen started crying. I heard from a mutual friend that she moved out of the city not long after. Couldn't stand the eyes, the stares, the whispering behind coffee cups. She ended up in some small town where nobody recognized her name, working part-time at a local print shop, folding brochures for businesses that would never hire her. The dream she built, the status, the image, the power, it was all ash now. Ronan never called her again. He transferred to a different branch. His wife filed for divorce. Last I heard, he was selling his house and moving to another state. He left behind nothing but unanswered messages and an HR investigation. He didn't even send her a goodbye. But I know she kept texting him anyway, even weeks after. I know because she started texting me again, too. First it was vague, hope you're okay. I still think about us. Then it grew desperate. I made a mistake. Please just talk to me. You were the only person who ever really loved me. I never answered. Not once. But I read every message, not for closure, but for confirmation. That the collapse was real. That she was finally living in the truth she worked so hard to avoid. Then came the visit. I heard the knock and knew it was her. The rhythm, soft, guilty, afraid. I opened the door, and there she stood, smaller, paler, eyes hollowed by weeks of regret. No makeup. No defiance. just wreckage in human form. She started crying the second she saw me. Please, she whispered, stepping forward like the past hadn't already buried her 10 feet deep. I don't know where else to go. I didn't move. I didn't invite her in. She looked around like maybe the house would save her. Like maybe the walls still remembered the good times. But they didn't. I didn't. I lost everything, she sobbed. I don't want to be this person anymore. Her voice cracked. I want to come home. I stared at her for a long time. Not with anger. Not with pity. Just clarity. And when I finally spoke, I said it quietly. There is no home. You burned it. Her knees buckled slightly, and she caught herself on the doorframe. You loved me once, she whimpered. That has to mean something. I nodded slowly. It does. It means I know exactly what I'll never settle for again. She shook her head, lip trembling, tears soaking into her collar. Please. I still love you. I looked her in the eye, the woman I once married, the stranger who stood in her place, and I said, strange. I don't even remember your name anymore. Then I closed the door. She stayed out there for a while. I heard her crying, pacing, whispering things to herself like maybe she could still fix it. But eventually, she left. And I didn't watch her go. I didn't need to. The silence told me everything. So now I ask you, you, listening on the other side of this story, what would you have done if it was your wife?